longer. So let me just share my screen and then we can launch into the topic. Okay. Okay, so look, what I wanted to do today is just talk about 4 simple points around PowerPoint, because, I mean, we can bombard you with a whole lot of information about this, but I think there's probably 4 key points that come out of this. And I also want to spend a bit of time talking about the preparation for Unit 5 and 6, and I've sort of put up a bit of a schedule, and I just wanted to check to see that that schedule's fine for you. And if it is, well, we can just launch in. So 5 and 6, of course, will be about you presenting, and just for 5 minutes. And then we just stop, and then I'll just simply ask people who have been observing it, what did you like about the presentation? And perhaps what might be some suggestions for improvement. That's all. And a lot of those suggestions, I'm hoping, will be based on some of the material we've run through in the program. So that's essentially where we're going. Let's, I'm just making sure I'm recording. Yeah, good. I organized that. Okay. So just quick sort of recap, if you like. We talked about some basic do's and don'ts around facilitation, and this included preparing as well as presenting. And I just wanted to set the scene in Unit 1 around some of those key things. In Unit 2, we talked about influence, and you might recall that there were 4 types of influence: investigation, motivation, calculation, and collaboration. So one of the concepts I'd like you to think about for your presentation next time we meet is how you might incorporate those 4. And albeit it's only a 5-minute presentation, but how might you do that? And then also when you're watching other people, how can you give them feedback on that as well? Then in Unit 3, we talked about building relationships and rapport online and also face-to-face, and some basic issues around how to do that. And of course, that's important to do that. And it's not necessarily too much more difficult online, I don't think. It's surprising lots of people. I mean, I do a lot of coaching online, for example, and I find it just works just as well. So I'm not sure there are huge impediments for that. And then today, obviously, we're going to talk about PowerPoint and some key points there. So whether we go for the full hour or not, I don't know, but we've got four key points around that I'll talk about. And then, of course, 5 and 6 around presentation. So the key points, and I'll reiterate these at the end as well, but I'll obviously elaborate on this as we go through. One of the key points I'd suggest, and I've tried to keep this as fairly simple as I can, is probably more images and less text if possible, because you know and I know when you've got a slide with lots and lots of text on it, you can get completely lost in the slide. And I think a lot of people make that error. So I think as a general rule, the idea is have more slides, but less information on each, rather than 1 or 2 slides with a lot of information on it. And that way it helps the slides are there to pretty much accommodate your presentation. They shouldn't be the presentation per se. So in line with that, the idea would be 1 point per slide, because if you look for 2 points per slide or whatever, you're going to get yourself, well, not so much you'll be okay, but the person on the receiving end will probably get a little bit confused potentially. Try not to use bullet points if possible. Bullet points, a list of bullet points becomes a little bit difficult, and also there's a temptation that when you've got a list of bullet points, what happens is you tend to read them off because it's a bit of a crutch for you. And so I think try and avoid that if possible. And as you know, with PowerPoint, you can, it's come a long way in the last 10 years. And now they give you suggestions to update your slides. And I think it's well worth having a look at that rather than just sticking to a static bullet point presentation. And I guess the key message out of all of that is to keep it as simple as possible. Simple doesn't mean superficial, by the way, but simple means simple, as in simple messages. And that's why today I want to sort of walk the talk by saying, I just want to cover these 4 points. And if you can get these right, pretty much your PowerPoint slides will go well. So just talk about the presentations. Guys, I put this list up here. I acknowledge that we meet again on the 23rd of November and then again on the 7th of December. So I'm acknowledging that, first of all, some of you aren't in the presentation today, and I'm probably partially to blame for that because of the Monday mess up. But of course, I'll be sending out the slides to you today. I'll send out the presentation too. But if you're on that list for the 23rd, then I'd like you to prepare for the 23rd. Now, if that's not possible for you, could you just do an internal organization? So, you know, for example, if you can't do it on the 23rd, is there somebody on December 7 that might be able to swap with you? And that way we sort of get an even number across both sessions. But as you can, if you can work out the maths there, obviously with 8 people presenting at a maximum, that sort of gives us about 40 minutes of presentation, not to mention the messing around with, you know, getting things organized and sharing screens and all that sort of stuff. But also I want to be able to give people obviously an opportunity to apply what you've learned, as in giving feedback. So if you work it out, 5 minutes is about the max. And so, you know, when you're preparing for this, it could be part of a larger presentation. So don't feel that, okay, how am I going to do this? Maybe you can do a small part of a presentation. The more practical it is, the better, because obviously I'm here to help you be as practical as you can. So the whole idea is, why don't you just find something work related, because that way you can practice online and have a little bit of a play around, both in preparation and also delivery, and then get some feedback from some of your colleagues. And then on Monday the 7th, we'll finish the balance up and do the same process. So I won't do much. I won't do any. I just can't afford to. I won't be able to present any material really. It'll just be straight into it. And I might say to Natalie, righto, Natalie, you're on. And Natalie goes and does her presentation in the moment we come online on the 23rd. So are there any questions about that? Any sort of queries that you've got relating to the presentations?
Yeah, I don't know what I have to presenting on, because I don't have anything to present, to be honest.
Okay, well,
I don't have customer interaction that much at all.
yeah, well, just try and be a bit creative about it. If you think about, you know, something that you perhaps know something about in the business that you'd like to present to the rest of the group for their benefit, that might be worthwhile.
Look, you could do it on the feature updates of SCCM.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know what that means, but
It's a cheery topic.
I will come up with something, but yeah, I can't do that either, Mike, because not in the product line.
Sorry.
I'll work on something. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, something. Remember, 5 minutes is nothing, and look, the rule of thumb that I sort of like to adhere to is that if I was presenting for 5 minutes, for example, I'd probably consider preparing about 5 slides. So the idea is, you know, if it's a 60-minute, 60 slides is too many, but 5 would be a maximum. So, you know, you might have 3 or 4, and you just put some of the principles in that we've learned about today. But look, I'll leave it with you. I can't, but look, anything at all. It doesn't, the bottom line is what we're doing is we're giving you an opportunity to practice what you've learned, rather than, you know, something that might be, you know, that you have to present. But I'm just thinking for some of you that might be ideal, but look, whatever works for you. Have a think about it anyway. You've got a couple of weeks to sort that out anyway. So, and you'll probably leave it to the last minute anyways.
I'll ask the team and see what they want to
Yeah,
cut
yeah,
from
yeah.
me.
Whatever.
Yeah, we go from there.
And
Not SECM.
we won't live stream it on. We won't live stream it on Facebook or something. So don't worry. It's only in house. so that's the sort of order. But I'll send you that list today, of course, with the slides. You know, the slide will be there. And so when we hit the ground running on the 23rd, it's just we'll go through the order there. I don't have to stick rigidly to that order, of course, but the idea would be that I would, you know, we would try and keep the group as even as possible, 8-7 or something like that. Now, the other thing is, what are you going to do? A couple of things that you might want to think about in your preparation. I've covered some of these things. 5-minute presentation because of the logistics that we've got an hour together. So basically we can't allow too much more than that. So 5 minutes, and so plan for that. And then what I'd like you to try to do is to use as many of the concepts that you've learnt in the presentation, in the preparation and delivery. So, you know, you might want to go back and look at some of the slides and think about some of the things that we've covered, and try to incorporate some of them in. Otherwise, what happens is nothing's changed. You know, you're just presenting the same as you perhaps would normally present. And the whole idea of the lunch and learn is we're trying to just help you get, you know, pick up a few key concepts. And then what I'm going to do for everyone, and I'd like, you know, as much participation as possible on this, I'll ask you, those observing, is simply 2 questions. What worked well? So we'll start with the positive. So, you know, what did you like about the presentation, basically? And then the other key question is, and this is an important one, any suggestions for improvement? So it's, you know, obviously we just do quick round the room, so to speak. And once that's done, we move on to the next presentation. So yeah, any questions about that? All good? Okay. So don't forget, I'll remind you, I'll send you out an email reminding you to get ready. And what I'll do in the email as well, actually, come to think of it, I might put the lists down so that you know when we've got you due. So if you're due on the latter day, then maybe you can just leave it until after the, you know, preparing it until after the next session. But obviously if you're due on the 23rd, then probably launch into it. All right, so let's talk about PowerPoint. And look, I want to make this as participatory as possible because I'm just talking about a few things that I've picked up here, and people would have different points of view about some of these things. So don't feel at all uncomfortable. I'm not the world's great expert on PowerPoint, although you can imagine a lot of my work is PowerPoint. And sort of I've learned a few things over the years, but I'd also acknowledge that I've probably developed some bad habits as well. So, you know, if you sort of don't agree with something, or you've got another point of view, don't be afraid to jump in. I think that's a good thing. But ultimately, I just want to stick to 4 key things, and they are all interrelated. So we'll talk about each of those. And let's start with rule number 1, if there's such a thing as a rule. So I think just as a general rule, I'd say more images and less text. So the idea is, you know, if you've got a slide with too much text, you're just going to find that people will just tune out. So, you know, and look, the bottom line is people like images. They do, assuming of course they're applicable to what you're presenting, because, you know, it helps people capture that image, and people are usually quite visual in their learning style. And because of that, an image can help a lot. Now, I know that some of you do present data and so forth, and I acknowledge that might present a bit of an issue. You might want to think about how you might break that data up to be a little bit more simplified on the screen, because, you know, if you just put up a spreadsheet or something, again, you'd be violating this rule. But I think also it would make it a little bit difficult for the person at the receiving end to understand exactly what what it all means. And you'd have to do twice as much explaining. So let's talk about that a bit further. There's an illustration, or, you know, just an exaggerated illustration. Too many words on a screen. It makes it difficult, first of all, to read. And if you're in a room, at the back of the room, remember, this isn't just about online. If you're at the back of the room, obviously it becomes difficult. And I've had people say to me, can't really read the screen. So that becomes a bit difficult. So there's a lot of reasons for it. Apart from confusion, it's also so that, you know, people can actually see. And obviously the more text you've got on the slide, the lower the smaller the font. And as a general rule, I'd say 24 is about where you need to be. 20, you could get away with 20, but I reckon 24 is about right. Okay, so if you end up having to choose between listening to you talking and reading your slides, you're out of sync, because remember, you put a slide up, people are reading it, people are listening to you, and obviously that becomes a little bit difficult. And I think the bottom line with all of this is that you're the presenter, and you are the presentation. The slides are there to help you rather than to take over, because otherwise people might say, well, why don't you just send me the slides? You know, what, you don't need to sort of read them off or refer to them as heavily as you have. And I'm sure all of you, you know, in your studies and, you know, lecturers and all sorts of people, most people don't have a clue about this. They just cram everything on slides, and it just becomes really a bit of a turn off and very difficult to be able to understand. So pride yourself on getting some of these rules right, and you'll stand out from the crowd, is my point. So you know, the bottom line with all of this is really, is the presentation working for you, or is it working against you? And, you know, so what I'd like you to do in your presentations is just spend a bit of time getting your slides right based on these 4 principles, so that, you know, you might have to think about how you might do that a little bit differently. So that's important. Images are nice to look at, and they can enrich your presentation. You're probably aware there are lots of places where you can get images now. Some you have to pay for, some you don't. I'll share some of that with you as well today. Google, I find, is pretty good. You know, I just find if you just go to images in Google, normally you can find an image that fits the mold very quickly without rummaging through a whole lot of other things. Sometimes with these other ones, you type in something like whatever, and it brings up all these other things that got nothing to do with it. So Google, I find, is pretty good, but I use other ones as well. All right, so people can look at the image and listen to you at the same time, no problem. So it helps a lot. So comments, observations about image, more image, less words, and the challenges for you in the work that you do presenting, because that's the other point, isn't it?
Tim, would you call a graph an image?
Yeah, a graph is an image. And I think what I would probably tend to do, I mean, graphs are great, because I mean, at the end of the day, a reason why graphs are so good is that you're summarizing a lot of information in one image. But the downside of that, of course, is you're summarizing a lot of information. So the graphs need to be, you know, obviously easy to read. I find that one of the things you do, let's say you've got to throw a complicated graph on the screen, you can actually highlight certain parts of the graph that you want to refer to, to draw people's attention to it, because otherwise the graph is just too consuming. So I think, Cindy, you just focus in on 1 or 2 aspects of it that become important. What sort of, you asked me that for a reason, what sort of graphs are you presenting on normally?
Most of our presentations are about monthly results or quarterly results or licensing reviews or any kind of analysis. So we do present graphs and those sorts of images a lot. What we tend to do is add text around the borders of those graphs, of course.
Right.
But there are other ways of doing that, I suppose, and even if it means revealing certain passages of text or further notes, using the the space bar or whatever to have them revealed through that view. Could that be something that is a little trick to help people's, I guess, interest levels and to keep that synchronization going?
Absolutely. I think you're right on there. So so in other words, it's imperative to produce material in graphs, as you're saying. And so one of the things that I'd strongly recommend is not too much text. I mean, obviously, you remember, the graph intimately, and so, but then the person's there staring at the graph, trying to work out what it all means. And then there's some words there they're supposed to read. Not only that, they're supposed to listen to you at the same time. And that becomes extremely difficult for someone to absorb those three things. So the very first thing you can take out is perhaps the words, and maybe just use pointers or something. I'm assuming you know what you're talking about when you're talking about the graph. So I think less words or no words would be good, and just highlight key points in the graph that are relevant. So I think that's the way I would approach it, because remember, the graph isn't the graph really is not, I mean, it's part of the presentation, but I mean, you're trying to make a point in the graph. So what's the point you're making is more important than, all of these figures and things on the screen. So yeah, look, I think, and your clients are probably, they probably expect you to present that material, but just try and simplify it, I think, is the key point. Just be conscious of how can I make this a little more simple, a little bit more readable, and you'll find your presentation will go a lot better that way. Because, just think about it from their point of view. I'm reading, I'm listening, and I'm looking. Reading, listening, and looking is a big ask for somebody. And, you're racing through your points on it. You're thinking it's probably self-explanatory. So that makes it probably worse, because it may not be to them. And so you've got this, and by the time you finish, you're on to the next thing, and it's sort of lost its effectiveness. So has anyone else got any comment about using graphs and what works for you, or what any feedback that you've had from people on the receiving end of your presentations?
I never get feedback.
No.
Sorry, I was just going to ditto what Cindy was saying, is that the points that you've gone through are really great. But I think if I was to share one of the types of reports that Cindy's talking, or the decks that Cindy's talking about, it's much more sort of data focused.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess summary of financial information, summary of computers. So it's much more sort of data driven presentations that we tend to deliver. And I guess the receivers are typically people. The receivers typically you'll typically have one commercial guy, like one procurement guy in there, who wants to know what the figure is. So we did something on Microsoft licensing, and it means that you save $20,000. So that's what he wants to know.
Right.
And then there'll be like a technical guy in there who wants to know, okay, I need to uninstall this piece of software from this number of machines, for example, or this number of machines that have reduced since last month. So that's the style of deck that our team tend to deliver quite frequently. So it might be tricky to apply some of these.
I don't know, Andrew. I think it's got me thinking about different ways we can present that. Because in a tool like PowerPoint, it's kind of powerful. We can use, a reveal or whatever.
Yeah.
And we've got a notes view that we can put our own notes in there.
Yeah.
And we can share the deck with the clients if that's what they want, to get the extra level of detail. We don't typically share the presentation with the customers, but we could.
Yeah,
Who
you're
knows?
right.
Yeah, have a think about it, Andrew. All I'm doing is prompting you to just think a little bit differently about what you're presenting. I mean, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, I'm not obviously, if people are after the data, they're after the data. But but remember that your whole presentation, whatever it might be, is probably trying to sort of persuade people or try to and so you've got to think, well, what am I trying to do here? And I think the other thing is, if people want more information, they can get it from you. It's not like, and if they ask you and you don't have it there, it's actually a good excuse to get back to them anyway and give them that information. But, just think about, well, what are they? So you've got these different people in the room. So it's good that you've explained that to me. And so all of them probably want different things out of the presentation. So the whole trick is get inside their head and think, now, what do they need in this presentation? And how can I simplify it so that, I'm not going to just, I don't know whether I told you the example, but I had an engineer who I was working with who, when she put proposals out to her clients, she'd put all of the sort of technical detail in the presentation, so she put it all in the presentation. But I explained to her and said, and this is a little different from where you're at, I understand, but I said to her, clients probably aren't engineers. They want to be confident that, you know what you're talking about. So by all means, have that information available because they may want to refer to it.
Yeah.
But when you're proposing something, at the end of the day, or you're putting something forward, what you're really trying to do is to persuade them about a course of action or not. And so they, I guess, assume that you've got technical know-how. So I don't think you have to demonstrate that too much. But look, I know you're not saying the same thing, and it was really interesting because she went away and she completely rejigged her presentations. And she said, if you want all the technical data, I'm happy to present it to you, but I wanted to just talk about the key points here. And she got much better results, much better buy-in and so on. But then again, she wasn't talking to people who think like her. They were not engineers, so they didn't want to hear all the technical stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, it's a balancing act, but all I want you to do is just provoke you to think a little bit differently about it. How might I do it slightly differently? And if I've got a choice between simple and complicated, I'll go simple. Because you can explain complicated things as well. And if people got questions, actually, that's not a bad thing because it creates a dialogue as well, and that's a good thing. So.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry,
Yeah.
just the point to add to that, which probably would have provided more context to where I was going, and I think what Cindy was referring to is that the presentations that we do or our team do are less. So they're not necessarily sort of like sales or proposals led. It's part of a managed service. So
I see. Yes.
It's like we have the monthly conversations and we deliver something in a monthly format. So there's a good base level of understanding of what we're talking. All parties involved. There's a very strong level of base understanding.
Yes, good.
Which is what enables us to be able to, I guess, deliver the content in the format that we deliver it. But completely take your point that if it was, if I was presenting to a new client, for example, and someone who didn't have that base level of understanding, if I was to present my slides to them, they would just be like, what on earth is all of this? It's just too much too much information with not enough context.
Yeah, no, thanks, Andrew. That helps me understand you a bit better because I think there's some people in the group here that, I mean, we've got a sort of a split group, haven't we? There's some people that do more sales type presentations and others technical. So we're trying to straddle those two things, but the principles I think are pretty much the same, depending on whether it's a sales or a reporting process. So
yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. So images are good. They help people learn it, which I think you know, and as we've talked about, obviously a slide is an image, sorry, a graph or some sort of, you know, something like that is an image, and they're very, very good. And you know, when I write, you know, I'm an author. I've written 10 books, and I won't hesitate in my books to put things into diagrammatical format if it's appropriate, because people can absorb a lot of information in a very small amount of time. So how can I sort of illustrate my point by putting together some sort of a graphic that will help people understand? Because otherwise it's just text, and then people lose, you know. I obviously try and write clearly, but they also often want illustrations, and that's where I guess it comes in when you're showing your graphs. So yeah, it's important not to overcomplicate the slides. I guess that's my point. Now, I won't go through all of these, but you know, I'm sure many of you would be aware of this, but by all means, have a bit of a look around, because there are a number of places where you can get some amazing images. As I said, I will often use Google as well as others, but some of them are free, some of them you pay for. But, you know, that can be worthwhile having a look at those things, and it can actually save you a bit of time as well, because, you know, if you've got the right sources, you can find things quickly and add them. And the good news is they're not always copyrighted, you know, so you can use them, basically, is the point I'm making, because you've got a license with that. So they're out there. In fact, there's probably too many of them, and that's why I've just listed down the bottom there 5 that probably are pretty good. I would probably recommend those, and again, you can always fall back to Google as well. Sometimes, you know, the issues I mean, it's pretty simple to use Google, of course. So anyway, just a thought if you're looking for images. So you make the most of your images as you possibly can. So if you're presenting data, how can I, you know, should I take, you know, and the other thing that I often use is the print part. So I'll just take a photo of one aspect of something and show it. So how can I sort of hone in on something to make a key point would be very, very useful, I think. So as I said earlier, the idea is that if you can try to, you know, as a rule of thumb, the font size being 24 is pretty good. 24 is good. Now, the reason why I say 24, apart from the fact that if you're presenting in a room, people at the back can see it, the other reason is that if you have to reduce the font from 24 down to, say, 20, probably what that means is that you've got too much information on the page. So 24 is a good number. So as you can see at the bottom, 24, if you need to go smaller than this, as I said, you're using too much text. So try and, as a rule of thumb, say, I'll go 24. If you need to reduce that, then I'd be strongly recommending to create a new slide with a different theme, rather than try and cram it all on the one slide, because it becomes extremely busy. And then, as I said, they've got to listen to you, they've got to read what's said, and then they've got to also absorb all of that into some sort of a meaningful learning experience. And that's not always an easy thing to do for a person on the receiving end. So just think about that from a font point of view. Doesn't matter what.
To throw sorry, Tim.
Yeah,
to throw
please.
Another curveball at you.
Yeah.
We've got corporate slides that fit a particular format. They've got to have, you know, copyright here, there, and everywhere, and brands and whatnot. Yeah, so we end up having a smaller slide than, you know, we would probably like, smaller spaces to use. So the minimum font size for us, would be a nice to have, but the reality is we probably are going to have to go smaller than that if we want to make any point at all per
Yeah.
slide.
Yes, I think that was mentioned earlier on the program that you've got your corporate slides. Obviously, there's no way around that, but maybe through the consciousness of what we're doing in this program, and if we do run others with you, we might be able to get the message across to whoever the people are that are putting all these things together, just to perhaps apply some of the principles that we've been talking about today, and that might be worthwhile doing. At least now you might be critically reflective of some of the sort of material that you have to present, realizing that maybe it could be improved.
Absolutely.
You know, so, and I think, you know, getting the message out there saying, oh no, we attended a presentation program and the presenter said blah, blah, blah. And, you know, they might not listen to you, but I mean, if enough people make the noise, that maybe things change. But usually people, I mean, I don't know, usually people that put these things together are often, you know, they're not necessarily privy to some of this sort of information, and so they will make mistakes, of course, and of course, you know, there's nothing you can do about that because you've got to present. So yeah, you just have to make do with what you can.
Maybe I'm just hedging my bets for my presentation in 2 weeks, Tim.
No, not a drama, not a drama. We won't criticise you for that because you can't. There's nothing you can do about this.
No worries.
Yeah. But it does raise the question that if, you know, if your organisation has to do a lot of this reporting and presenting, then, and that's an important part of your work, then it does raise the question that if you're looking at continuous improvement in your organisation, then obviously the way things are presented should be one of the things that are put on the table. But anyway, you and I don't have the, well, I don't certainly have the power to change that, but I think if people talk about that enough internally, that might happen. Okay, so rule number 2, I guess what I'd be saying there, and of course these are all interrelated, and I'm making a clear, hopefully a clear point out of all of this, is try and make one point per slide. So if you've got several points to make and you're using the same data, it might well be useful to, you know, circle one thing and then maybe it's really probably another slide, but it doesn't look like it. Circle something else on another slide, circle. So in other words, you select little key points on the information and present that way, rather than just talk generally at the information that's in front of you. So I'm sure you could, I'm sure there won't be a problem to do that. Pointers or things like that that make a difference. So focus on, as I say, one thing at a time, because really, I think it's really interesting that people talk about multitasking as if it's some virtue. You know, I can send an email, I can listen to somebody else. But, you know, the reality is that your brain cannot actually multitask. It's interesting that it's a bit of a myth. Well, we can to a certain extent, of course. But I mean, if you're tapping out an email and you're listening to someone, you can be assured, okay, you're multitasking, but you can be assured that the email is not going to be as good as it could be. And you're probably likely not to be absorbing the conversation as well as you can anyway. So we should be actually going against the grain of a lot of that and actually sort of focusing on one thing at a time. So same in presentation, of course. So the idea is just you know, just one thing at a time. Don't try and talk about 10 things at once and you're just going to confuse people. It's interesting what you said, Andrew, and I've got to be mindful that your audience isn't really all looking at the information for the same reason. So that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, and it does create challenges for you because in many ways you've got to be all things to all people. But I think as a principle, try one thing at a time. I think that's the important point out of that. And colour works well as well. Colour, people do respond well to that. I don't know how much leeway you've got around that. Is that, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe it's
we've got some great corporate colors. You know, they go from blues to fuchsias to hot pink. So generally they've got a good color, like a lot of color. So I don't think color's really our problem.
Great, good, yeah. Well, you know, whether it might sound superficial or not, we like color. As we just respond to those sort of things. Otherwise, there wouldn't be colorful signs everywhere, and you know, there's color everywhere. So you know, you don't want to be making it too drab, obviously. But clearly, that's already been done for you. So I'm pleased to hear that. So a splash of color never goes astray. And you know, focusing on one thing at the presentation. So what are you trying to get across in the presentation? So what you're trying to do, I think, with your PowerPoint at the end of the day is to focus attention on a key point. So therefore, the question is, how can you present that information to get people to focus on the one point you want to make, rather than have them all over the place, you know, looking at different things and all the rest. So try to think, how can I get them to focus on this one point through my visuals? I can do that obviously verbally, fairly easily, but while you're trying to focus verbally on one thing, their eyes are wandering all over the place because of the information that's on the screen. So the whole idea is to get them to focus visually as well as verbally. You can break the rules occasionally, of course, and you know, you can have you know, 1 point per slide or maybe 2. I mean, a good example of that might be that, and I've said this to you earlier in the presentation in Unit 1, a nice starting point before you launch into your presentation is to have a little bit of a map of where you want to go today. Instead of just launching straight into it, just say, look, there are 3 key things that I'd like to cover today. And then, of course, on your screen, you'd have the 3 key things, as I've done in each of my sessions, is to just lay out what I'm going to cover. That way, you've got their focus on some key things. So instead, because you know, how often have you been to a presentation and they just launched into it, and you're thinking to yourself, where is this going? What are we actually going to be learning? And that takes up a lot of energy, and you're trying to work through all that. So by having 3 or 4 key points on the opening slide, you are just training people to think, okay, and it's also helpful for you too, because it forces you not to go off the rails, unless of course there's a big question and they want to talk about something else. But that just forces you to be succinct and to the point. So yes, you can break the rules in that sense and have 3 key things there. I think that's fair and reasonable. All right, so as I said here on this slide here, introductions, you know, you can have your 3 key points. The other thing that's very useful, and I don't know how applicable it is for the work that you do, but is there any value in you summarizing what you've covered? So you could actually, you know, the old adage, sorry, there's a typo there, I know. Tell people, I shouldn't have told you that, maybe you wouldn't have picked it up. No, tell people what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you've told them. This is the principle. So tell people what you're going to tell them, which is your outline. Tell them, which is the body of what you're going to talk about. And then at the end of it, tell them what you've told them. And this is what's called repetition. And you've actually sort of helped them to crystallize in their mind what the presentation's about, what you're trying to do, and all the rest of it. So that's a good little principle to get into. And I often say with my MBA students that I lecture in, when you're writing your essay, your first paragraph is pretty much telling me, the reader, or whoever it is, you know, what are you going to be covering in this essay? This 2,500 word essay, what is the key points out of that? And then because, you know, as a reader, it's very frustrating if you can't pick that up in the early stages. And then the bulk of the essay is obviously around the key points that you make, backing it up with stats and data and all the rest of it, research. And then at the end to conclude, and the conclusion is to summarize the key points that are made. All right, so that'd be one of the principles we'd be looking for in units 5 and 6 when you're presenting. So try and get some structure around that. It'll make all the difference in the world. But, you know, as a general rule, I would suggest, you know, give people room to breathe, give people a chance to just absorb the message that you're getting across, notwithstanding, you know, some of the comments that Andrew and others made. Just don't overcomplicate the presentation side of things. Otherwise you will lose people. That's, you know, because remember, the other thing I'd say to you, and I may not have, I think I might have mentioned this, your brain processes words at about 500 plus words a minute. And when you're talking, you can talk at up to about 200 and something words a minute, not many. So there's a gap, obviously. And so therefore they're thinking, what am I going to have for lunch? What's my next meeting going to be about? Have I got that report done? So they've got all this information floating around their head, and then you're trying to sort of cram more information to their head. So obviously you don't want to make that too difficult in that sense. Now, I'd be interested to hear, do you guys have to use bullet points or not? This is rule number 3. Is that something, what happened? Have you got sort of like corporate slides with bullet points, or what happens there?
So the deck that we tend to use for the type of like reporting that we were talking about before,
yes,
it's a deck. So obviously a white main page, and then it has on the right hand side, it has a purple, I don't know what to call it, like a purple sidebar. And I think normally I would probably include, say, like 2 bullet points or just 2 like summary pieces of information.
Yeah.
As to that talks to the content of the slide. So in the main white section of the slide, I may include like a graph or some form of like data, and then I'll just include in the sidebar just like 2 bullet points that kind of provide a summary.
Yeah, that's probably not too bad. I'd be inclined not to go too many more than 2, otherwise you'll lose people.
Yeah.
Look, I occasionally do still use bullet points, but I think we've all been to presentations where we've just been overloaded with bullet points, and it's not actually very helpful. On the receiving end, I'm talking about. We all know that. So I'm just saying, don't you fall into that trap, because it's sort of like conventional way of doing things, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's right. It just can be quite dull and very distracting. So, okay, I take that. That's fair enough. A couple of points is okay. Look, they can be ugly. They don't leave much room for images. And this is when we talk about death by PowerPoint. Ultimately, I'm using bullet points here, of course, but when we talk about death by PowerPoint, that's ultimately, I think, what we're really on about. So just be mindful not to have too many of those if possible. They also encourage you, as I said earlier, to read the bullet points, because it's natural. You don't want to miss anything. So the inclination from the presenter is to actually go through each bullet point. And it's funny, we all know our stuff better than we actually think. And it's a bit of an insecurity, like a security blanket, I think, sometimes, bullet points. And I mean, we know our stuff pretty much, all of us. And I think sometimes it does lead to reading them off the screen. And that's, that's not necessarily a good idea, not a good principle to do. Because as I say, why don't you just send them an email? Why do you have to have a presentation? So And you might say, well, they might not read the email, but then again, they may not pay attention to the presentation either because of the sort of abundance of bullet points. So, so obviously the other side of it is if you're saying it and you're reading it and it's on the screen, what you're not adding any value. The screen isn't adding any value. So that's what I'm trying to get at, that the screen is there to add value, not to just reiterate what you're saying, if you know what I mean. So it's sort of just another point around that. So wrapping up now, rule number 4 is to keep it simple. Now, keep it simple doesn't mean dumbing it down. So there is a difference here. If you look at people who are very talented at presenting complex information, what they are able to do is to simplify the messages. And I think everyone should try and pride themselves on that. So it's not about actually being superficial. It's really just helping other people, getting inside their head and giving them an opportunity to learn and to absorb. So it doesn't mean, don't think when I say simple, it means dumbing it down. It doesn't mean that. So what this busy screen saying is what it means is only present the essential information, all right? Because, it gets very difficult to absorb. It's all about getting rid of everything else except the essential information. So, so just any extraneous information, anything that's not helping the presentation clearly is actually getting in the way. It's distracting. And I think that's the key message I want to leave you with today. So, so any questions, comments, observations? Now, I realize that this is an area of your presentation, now that you've told me and you've enlightened me, probably you're not going to be able to do too much about. And I guess we just have to deal with what we're going to deal with. There's a whole lot of other information that I've shared with you over the Lunch and Learn that clearly will be able to be used. So, but anyway, having said that, any comments, observations, questions?
I'm going to be busy, Tim. Thanks for all of this stimulus, I guess.
Yeah, well, hopefully it's not, I don't want anybody to be, spending hours and hours and hours on this. That's why I kind of said I'm a pretty practical person when it all comes down to it. I just didn't want people to be going out of their way to present something they wouldn't normally present. But look, that's a decision for you. But all I want you to do, and I guess all I've done in these 4 hours that we've spent together, all I'm trying to do is to get you to think differently about how you present. That's the simple message. And to think, look at it through a different frame. And if you can bring something to that, if you can improve your presentation by 10%, then clearly you've got your time worthwhile. It's worked out for you. So yeah, hopefully you don't go to too much trouble, Cindy. Anybody else? Anyone else?
No, it was really good. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, really.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, and thank you for just enlightening me on some of the constraints that you're under internally as well. At the end of the day, some of those things you can't do anything about, so you just have to deal with it. But maybe you can bring the lens of other things that we've talked about into your presentation as well. So.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, there's heaps there. All right.
Tim, there's a lot of people that didn't get the email for today's, hence why there's only it. I've just found mine. It went into my spam.
Right.
And same with Luke and Emil, because I've been trying to get them on. So there's a handful of people that actually didn't get on today.
Yes.
So that's why I was late. So
I see.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what you want to do, because how much we've only got four or five of us on today when we normally have 8 or 9 or
probably even more than that.
Even more than that.
I'm going to send out the slides and I'm going
Great.
to send out the recording as I normally do. Hopefully that will go, that won't go,
Yep.
you know, that'll be
Well, I'll send
accessible.
an email to Darlene and get everyone to double check their spam filter now, because I had a feeling, and then I went, oh, and I do check my filtering, but it didn't come up until I checked it again today, because Cindy sent me a message saying, hey, you coming? And I went, what? So,
Oh, I see. Thanks, Gabby.
so
Yeah.
I just, sorry about that. I just thought I'd give you just that bit of a rundown.
No,
So,
I appreciate that. And, you know, I think that, look, I'll send you the recording. I'm sending everyone the recording, or a link to it at least. I'll upload it to YouTube and send the recording to everyone. And I'll send you the slides, and I'll make a point in the email of the lists of people to present. So that's important. And just that if you didn't present, if you didn't attend, it's a very good idea to watch the video. That's all I can do, I guess.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, seeing some of the boys that are new to our sales team, they're like Emil and Luke. So, you know, this will be really good for them. So
Yeah. So that's good. Yeah. And I realise we're straddling a whole range of different people presenting on a whole range of different things. And so some of the things are applicable, some aren't, I get that, but hopefully some things have worked for you.
that's great.
Yeah, so just a summary quickly, 5-minute presentation, work on your structure, think about how you might influence and use the 4 influencing styles, engage us online, even though it's only 5 minutes, of course, try to ask us some open-ended questions. I'm sure we'll be very cooperative with you. And then of course, just be mindful of the slides and the PowerPoint as well. They're the key messages out of today. So thanks everyone. We'll catch you in a couple of weeks, and by all means, don't hesitate to reach out if you need assistance or whatever in the normal course. So thanks everyone.
Thanks, Tim.
Cheers. Catch you in a
Bye.
couple of
Cheers, Tim.
weeks.
Thanks,
Thank
Tim.
you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
See you.